My name is Hope, and I had a relationship with a transsexual. To understand better, stay until the end. I ask you not to judge me because my marriage was very bad. I'll tell you a little bit about it first so you can understand it better. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my videos. I remember the exact moment when I realized that my marriage was sinking. It wasn't a big event. It wasn't a scream or a scandalous fight. It was something quiet, gradual, like a broken vase that shatters into small pieces until, in the end, you can hardly recognize what's left. Saul had always been a good man, considerate in moments that counted, but over time he became lost in his own world. His work as a lawyer in the city of Lakeview consumed every bit of time we could have together. He spent more time at the office than at home, and when he was home, he was stuck on his cell phone, answering emails and messages. I didn't complain. I'm not the type to demand attention all the time. But there were days when I felt so alone that the house, instead of being a home, seemed more like a warehouse for our empty routines. I started to get used to the loneliness. When he was around, conversations seemed obligatory, as if we were just playing a role. I knew everything he said before he even started talking. How was your day? How was work? Were no longer genuine questions, but just a formality. And I, who had always been the woman who believed in romantic love, in those little things that made life together special, began to realize that I was sinking into a silent emptiness. It was in this sea of apathy that I met Scarlett. I was working at Chic Boutique, an elegant and cozy clothing store in downtown Lakeview. It wasn't a big place, but it was charming, with windows that always caught the eye of passers-by. Scarlett started working with me in the accessories section, and she immediately stood out, not because of her looks, which were already impressive, but because of the energy she carried with her. She had a calm presence, but at the same time, she exuded confidence in a way I had never seen in a woman before. Scarlett was a fascinating transsexual woman. At first, I saw her only as a co-worker, someone with whom I shared quick conversations during the workday. But as time went by, I began to realize how different she was from everyone I knew. She spoke easily about her transition, about the challenges she faced, but always with a positive outlook, as if life were a series of challenges to be overcome with grace. She had a wisdom that impressed me. I, on the other hand, found myself increasingly in a spiral of frustration, unable to share what I really felt with anyone. Our conversations began to deepen. I don't know exactly when it started, but there was a day when I began to open my heart to Scarlett in a way I had never done before. We talked about relationships, about expectations, about the frustrations that everyone keeps to themselves. And when she looked at me, I felt understood. She listened to me with a rare patience, without judgment, without rushing to offer solutions. I needed that more than I realized. On those afternoons after work, we started having coffee together. At first, they were conversations about everyday life, about the simple problems of working in a clothing store. But soon, the words began to touch on deeper issues. I talked about Saul, about how he seemed so distant, about how I felt more like his friend than his wife, and Scarlett, with her calm and caring manner, offered me something that Saul no longer could: empathy. She knew what it was like to be neglected, not in the physical sense, but emotionally. And what touched me most was the way she didn't seem to resent it. She simply lived her truth and moved on. In one of these meetings, while I was watching her talk about an event she had attended at the weekend, an unusual feeling came over me. It wasn't just admiration for her strength. It was something more, something I didn't want to admit. I was beginning to feel attracted to Scarlett. At first, I tried to ignore these feelings, confused and even a little ashamed. I loved Saul after all. We had a history together. We had shared dreams. But at the same time, something in me was dying, and Scarlett seemed to be the only person who made me feel that there was still life in me. One evening, after yet another argument with Saul, one of those fights where he accuses me of playing up, I decided to call Scarlett. I wanted to vent. I wanted to feel that someone was there for me. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and, more than anything, I wanted some fresh air. She answered almost immediately. "Hi, Hope. How are you?" Her voice sounded soft and welcoming, as always. Minus I don't know, Scarlett. I'm confused. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in an empty house. Saul, he doesn't see. He doesn't understand. I don't know if what I have with him still makes sense. I let out my feelings, without mincing words. Scarlett listened without interrupting, as if it was normal for someone to talk about a relationship like that. And maybe it was. Maybe we all carry some kind of loneliness. I know what you mean. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in other people's expectations. But you have the right to be happy, Hope. To pursue what makes you feel alive. Those words touched me deeply. I knew she wasn't just talking about weddings, but about life in general. About the freedom to be who we really are. Minus I don't know. I just feel trapped. Trapped in a marriage that's not moving forward. And at the same time, I'm so attracted to you, Scarlett. I don't know what's happening to me. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and I sensed that she was carefully considering her words. You don't have to be afraid of what you're feeling, Hope. I understand. Maybe you need to explore what's inside you, without being afraid to be who you really are. I looked out of my apartment window at the soft light of the city outside, as if searching for an answer. Scarlett's words were echoing in my mind, but there was a part of me that still hesitated. Saul's voice, his dry words, came back into my head. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't go on living in a marriage where I felt invisible, where I myself no longer knew who I was. It was at that moment, with the loneliness taking hold of me, that I made an impulsive decision. I needed to do something different. I needed to discover myself, and maybe Scarlett was the key to that. Scarlett, would you like to go out with me sometime? Just to talk without rushing. Maybe I need a bit more time to think, but maybe it will help me understand what I'm feeling. She laughed softly, and I knew she understood. Of course, Hope. I'd love to. Just let me know when. At that moment, a part of me felt light, as if I had taken the first step towards something new. Something that, until then, I had never imagined. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The morning after my invitation to Scarlett didn't go as I had expected. I was still scared, my mind full of questions and my heart a little tight. The night before had been an emotional roller coaster, and deep down I knew that something was moving inside me. Something I could no longer ignore. Morning light streamed in through the window of my apartment in Lakeview, but there was no heat. I didn't know exactly how I felt, and that only made me more confused. When I looked over, I saw Saul sleeping soundly. He always slept as if he were a rock, without moving, as if the bed were a safe and unshakable refuge. I had never got completely used to this feeling of loneliness next to him. But that moment, as I watched him, was when I realized how distant he really was from me. It was as if he was just an empty presence next to me, so lost in his own world that I barely existed in it. I got up carefully, so as not to wake him, and went to the kitchen. I made coffee, an automatic gesture I'd been doing for years, but which seemed to have no meaning that day. The routine was suffocating me, swallowing me up bit by bit. And the worst part was that I no longer knew how to get out of it. Scarlett's words were still fresh in my mind. You have the right to be happy, Hope. To pursue what makes you feel alive. Every time I repeated this phrase to myself, I felt something stir inside me, like a flame that was about to ignite. But fear soon followed, extinguishing the flame. Fear of what I might lose. Fear of facing the truth. Fear of being judged. Fear of being who I really was. I dressed simply, as I always did for work, and grabbed my bag. As I passed through the living room, I looked at Saul once more. He was still there, motionless, as if he wasn't part of my world. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of relief. I didn't know how to live that life anymore. I wanted something different, something that was mine alone. I arrived at Chic Boutique with my thoughts bubbling, trying to organize everything I was feeling. The air conditioning in the store was cold, and the soft smell of new clothes and perfumes floated through the room. In the background, ambient music played softly, but it sounded distorted to my ears. I was so out of tune with everything around me. The feeling of being in a place that was no longer part of me was overwhelming. Scarlett was there, as always, smiling as she arranged some accessories on the shelf. She looked beautiful, with her dark hair tied up in an elegant bun. Her face exuded a calm that made me feel even more disoriented. She looked at me as soon as I walked in, and her smile was like a beacon in my mental fog. "Hi, Hope. How are you today?" she asked, her voice soft but full of genuine interest. I didn't know how to answer that question. How could I tell someone who could barely stand being in her own skin, let alone my life? But at the same time, I knew I could trust her somehow. Scarlett wouldn't judge me. She would understand. If you like this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm confused, actually, I said with a shaky voice, more than I expected. She watched me with her attentive eyes and patiently put what she was doing aside. I knew she would give me all the attention I needed. There was no rush, no judgment. "What happened, Hope?" she asked, approaching slowly, as if she were respecting the space between us, but also offering comfort. I looked at her and, for a moment, it was as if the rest of the world disappeared. There was no Saul, no longer the suffocating routine of my home or the weight of my previous life. There was just me and Scarlett in a safe space. Minus I don't know what I'm doing, Scarlett. I love Saul, but I feel so far away from him, as if we were just playing off each other. He's always so distant, so absorbed in his work, and I'm here, waiting for something to change, but nothing does. And at the same time, I've been drawn to you in a way I didn't expect. I don't know what that means, and I'm afraid of what it might do to my life." Scarlett was silent for a moment. Her expression was serious, but there was no surprise. She seemed to understand, in a profound way, something that I was still trying to decipher in myself. She moved a little closer, still without invading my personal space, but enough to make me feel safe. "Hope, you're in a time of transition. I know that, and that's okay. Sometimes life takes us down paths we don't expect. I understand how you feel, and there's no right or wrong in what you're experiencing. There is only what is true for you. If your marriage is making you unhappy, maybe it's time to look at what really matters. And if that means exploring new feelings, new desires, then so be it. You don't need to define yourself now. You're just discovering yourself." I looked at her, completely absorbed by her words. It was as if she was showing me a new path, something I would never have considered before. Scarlett wasn't telling me what to do, but she was giving me permission to feel what I was feeling. And that, somehow, made me feel lighter. "But what about you, Scarlett?" I asked, almost without thinking. "How do you deal with it? With being who you are, with being authentic?" I'm lost," she smiled, with a sweet, understanding look. It wasn't the smile of someone who had all the answers, but the smile of someone who had learned to accept her own journey. "I allow myself to be who I am, Hope. Sometimes people will try to tell you what you should do, or what you should be. But in the end, who you are is up to you. Don't worry about other people's expectations. If you feel that you need to change, that you need to explore your own truth, then do it. What you feel is what matters. There's no need to rush." I was silent for a few seconds, trying to process everything she had told me. How could I have been so blind to my own needs for so long? How could I have spent years at Saul's side and not realized that I was losing myself? But at that moment, something broke loose inside me. I needed to change. I needed to discover myself. I needed to be true to myself. And that didn't mean abandoning what I had with Saul, but understanding what I really wanted. And perhaps that would be impossible without some change. I think I'm ready to leave the house tomorrow, to talk to him, to understand what's really going on between us, I said, not knowing if I believed it myself. Scarlett smiled with a twinkle in her eye. She didn't say anything else, but I knew she was there, supporting my decision. The day passed slowly. I felt a growing anxiety, but also a sense of freedom. I knew that my life was about to change in some way, but I didn't know exactly how. And deep down, that terrified me. However, something inside me began to ignite. Maybe, after all, I needed something different. Something that would make me feel alive again. I was ready to take the next step. And I didn't know where it would take me, but I was willing to find out. I knew that meeting Scarlett would be decisive, but I couldn't imagine how it would change everything. When I saw her again after our conversation, there was something different in the air. Tension, anticipation, seemed to surround us. Everything was conspiring to make this moment happen. I could feel it in every word we exchanged, in every furtive glance she threw at me. There was a magnetism between us, something that grew with every second, with every subtle gesture. That day, after work, I decided to make it a night. I needed it. I needed to see how far the attraction I felt for her could take me. The idea of trying something new, something that would make me feel alive again, took hold of me. My marriage to Saul was already in pieces, and I no longer knew how to fix it. Life with him was dragging on, but with Scarlett, I felt a chance to be who I really was, to explore a side of myself that had never been discovered. When we arrived at the restaurant, a charming and discreet bistro in the center of Lakeview, the soft candlelight and gentle music in the background seemed to conspire to create the perfect mood. The atmosphere was intimate, with only a few tables and a vintage air that reminded me of old Parisian evenings in romantic movies I'd always watched alone. The smell of red wine mixed with the aroma of sophisticated food filled the air, and the sound of cutlery and low conversations around us seemed distant, as if the world had slowed down, just for the two of us. Scarlett looked stunning, as always. She wore a black silk blouse with a long skirt that moved smoothly with every step. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, deep and penetrating, shone in the soft light of the restaurant. When she smiled at me, something in my chest surged, as if a secret door had been opened. "You look beautiful, Hope," she said with a soft smile, taking her place at the table. Those words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't used to being complimented like that. Saul had always been more practical, more restrained. It wasn't as if he didn't love me, but he just didn't have the gestures, the words that touched my soul like Scarlett did. "Thank you, Scarlett. I don't know how I feel today. I think I'm a bit nervous," I confessed, as I looked at the menu without really seeing anything. My stomach was tight, a mixture of excitement and fear. She laughed softly, nodding her head with a gentleness that seemed to have the power to calm the turmoil inside me. "There's no need to be afraid, Hope. We're just here to get to know each other better. There's no rush, no expectations." I nodded, trying to relax. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear, but the anxiety was still there, like a constant shadow. She was being so patient, so kind, that it only increased the impact of what I was about to do. I was about to cross an invisible line, a boundary that, once crossed, could not be undone. Dinner went smoothly. We talked about our lives, about work, about the places we wanted to visit. But as time went by, the glances between us became more intense. Every time she looked at me, Her eyes seemed to touch me in a different, deeper way. I was beginning to lose myself in that moment, in that small space between us, where the rest of the world didn't exist. I could hear my breathing, the rapid beating of my heart, as if we were in a bubble of time, where only she and I mattered. The wine was having an effect, making me more relaxed, looser, and I allowed myself to let go of my fear for a moment. I knew something was unfolding there. I could feel the attraction, like an invisible thread connecting us more intimately. It wasn't just words, but a play of glances, delicate gestures. I was longing for something more, but I still didn't know exactly what it was. After dinner, we went for a walk through the quiet streets of Lakeview, the yellow lamps illuminating our shadows on the sidewalk. The cool night air seemed to clear my mind, but the heat inside me didn't subside. She was by my side, but now there was something different. The space between us seemed to have shrunk. I could feel her presence getting closer, like a wave about to engulf me. When we arrived at the building where she lived, the atmosphere was silent, and the dark corridor seemed to be a reflection of my mind, a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity. She looked at me with a soft smile, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't identify. It was something deep, something I'd never seen in anyone before. She didn't say anything, but just looking at me like that made my heart soar. I knew that, at that moment, I was about to do something that would change everything. We entered her apartment, which was lit by candles, creating a cozy and intimate atmosphere. She took off her jacket and put it on the chair and, with a gentle gesture, invited me to do the same. I hesitated for a moment, but then followed her lead, feeling my body tense up, and at the same time, inexplicably drawn to her. The room was warm, but I felt as if the cold had disappeared, as if the air was charged with electricity. Scarlett approached me and, with a gentle touch, placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked at her, my eyes searching for answers that I didn't know were there. She smiled, but this time it had a touch of intensity. "Are you sure about this, Hope?" she asked in a low, almost whispering voice. Her eyes were fixed on mine, as if she were reading my soul, and I knew that at that moment there was no turning back. I took a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but part of me already knew what I wanted. I didn't know where it would lead, but I could no longer deny the desire that was pulsing inside me. I needed to see how far it could go. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice firmer than I had expected. Scarlett then gently pulled me closer, and our bodies met in a closeness that made my heart beat faster. She was kissing me, just as softly as she spoke, but there was an intensity to her action that took me by surprise. Her touch was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, but a deep emotional connection that seemed to cross all the barriers I had built up. I surrendered to the moment. No more doubts, no more fears. I was there, with Scarlett, in a space where there were no judgments, where I could be who I really was. And at that moment, that was the only thing that mattered. The following weeks dragged by in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. I was living in two different realities, and the burden of this was beginning to consume me. What was happening with Scarlett made me feel alive in a way I'd never experienced before, while life with Saul was becoming more and more a mask I had to put on to keep up appearances. I was torn between two worlds, two conflicting desires, and although the feeling of freedom filled me when I was with Scarlett, there was always the weight of guilt that accompanied me in the shadows. Every time I went home, there was a feeling of disconnection, as if the person I was next to Saul was no longer who I really wanted to be. I saw myself walking around the house, the smell of coffee and old books filling the atmosphere, but everything seemed distant. Saul was always busy, and the familiarity of his absence made me feel that we were just living in the same space, but not really together. One evening, After yet another dinner where the words were formal and lifeless, I retired to my room. Saul was on the sofa, reading something on his laptop. He was always like that, immersed in his work, unaware of how invisible I felt. When I went into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, the reflection looking back at me seemed strange. The woman I saw there was lost, fragmented between the worlds of I should and I want to, between the marriage I was trying to maintain and the person I was starting to become with Scarlett. My cell phone vibrated in my bag. It was a message from Scarlett. "Do you want to go out tonight?" A simple question, but one that made me feel a wave of relief and, at the same time, a lump in my throat. I wanted to. I really wanted to. But what about Saul? I could no longer fool myself about the life I was living with him. Something in me was breaking, fragmenting, and the desire to be with Scarlett was dragging me in a direction I didn't know where it would end. I answered quickly, "Yes, I want to. I'll meet you in half an hour." I left the house without saying a word to Saul. He probably wouldn't even notice. He was so absorbed in his own world that my absence would be just one more among the many we already had. When I arrived at Scarlett's apartment, the feeling of relief was immediate. The room was cozy, softly lit, with the curtains open, allowing the moonlight to invade the space. The smell of aromatic candles and incense was in the air, and the soft music playing in the background was the perfect setting for the night I knew I was about to experience. Scarlett welcomed me with a warm smile, her eyes shining with an intensity that made me feel I was finally in the right place. I felt safe, free, as if I could let go of all expectations, all obligations. "You look beautiful, Hope," she said, her gaze roaming over my face with genuine affection. I smiled, feeling a warmth grow inside me. I no longer cared about what was happening at home. I was with Scarlett, and at that moment, that was all that mattered. "Thank you, Scarlett. I'm starting to lose myself in this life, between what's real and what I should be. And when I'm here with you, I feel like I can be myself, without hiding." She moved closer to me, her penetrating gaze making my heart beat faster. "I know, Hope. I know exactly what you're feeling. Sometimes we get lost in what others expect of us, and we forget to listen to ourselves. But you have the right to be happy, to find yourself, even if that means making difficult choices." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the truth of her words, and then looked at Scarlett with a new determination. I knew that this double life couldn't last forever. I couldn't keep pretending to Saul, nor could I hide what was growing inside me. "I have to do something, Scarlett. I can't go on with this. I can't live in two worlds and pretend that everything is fine." She put a gentle hand on my shoulder, her touch comforting. "What are you going to do?" she asked calmly, her gaze gentle but at the same time penetrating, as if she were encouraging me to make a decision that was true to me. I took a deep breath, thinking about what I was about to say. I knew I had to be honest with Saul, not just with him, but with myself. I'm going to talk to Saul. I'm going to tell him how I feel. I know he deserves it. But I also know that my life with him can't be the same anymore. I can't go on with this emptiness. I can't go on living as if nothing is wrong. Scarlett smiled slightly, and something in her gaze made me feel that she knew this was the only possible choice. She hugged me gently, and the gesture was so simple but at the same time so profound, as if we connected in a way that didn't need words. "You're going to do what's right for you, Hope. And that's the most important thing. I'll be here for you, whatever you decide." Those words stayed with me as I left his apartment that night. I knew I was at a crossroads, and the decision to be honest with Saul and with my own truth was inevitable. I could no longer go on living this lie, even if it had given me something I had never known was missing in my life. When I got home, the light in the living room was off, and the silence was heavy. Saul was no longer on the sofa. He had probably already gone to bed, completely immersed in his own thoughts. I knew that the conversation I was about to have with him would be difficult, but there was no turning back. I needed to be honest. To him. To myself. I walked into the bedroom and looked at his face. So peaceful. And then I decided to live this double life and not tell him anything. Today I stay married and have a relationship with Scarlett, and I confess that this has made me happier in recent months. What do you think I should do? Tell my husband everything and try to get him to join in? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you tomorrow, my lovelies.